He can do it. Clint can do it, I know.
I haven't been able to see it, but let's let him do it today.
We'll call the meeting to order at 5:35. Drew, would you provide us with an invocation, please?
Father God, we are so grateful to be in your presence and have opportunity to serve our community. Father God, we just ask that you give us wisdom and grace to do that well. It's in the name of Jesus we ask. Amen.
Would you please stand for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Kevin Keener,
Here.
Drew Jackson,
Here.
Clint Horner,
Here.
Shane Knight,
Here.
Whitney Kerr. Here.
All are, yeah. All are present. First item of business is consent items. Number 1A, consider approval of regular meeting minutes of September 7th, 2021. Have any discussion?
I move to approve.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Call for the vote, please. Item 2, we don't have any consent items that were removed. Item 3, under information items, transitional zoning committee update. Ms. Danielle.
At the last meeting, you all wanted to give you an update as we progress through with the transitional zoning committee. We did get the committee formed. We have two planning commissioners, two city council members, myself, and John is sitting on that committee. We had our first meeting this past Friday. Essentially, we just had more questions and answers. The ordinance that was proposed a couple months ago, you may remember, we all kind of discussed that it sounded more of an HOA type of deal, more so than a city implementing something exactly like that. However, there was some research that was discovered of kind of using like overlay districts or something kind of on the zoning piece. And we are working on getting a meeting set up with a few of the people that I've talked with that's dealt with transitional zoning. So once we get that meeting set up, we'll have the second meeting and kind of have some, I don't want to call them experts because they don't like that, but people that know more than I do about transitional zoning. There we go. We'll put it that way. So, and then once we get that done, then I'll come back with you guys and tell you kind of where we're at. It sounds like we're interested in the idea and the concept. It's just we want to make sure if that we do want to do it, that it is done a proper way that's going to not negatively impact or have the least negative impact as possible. Makes sense. Any questions?
I'll just make a comment. I think Whitney had a conflict on that scheduled time, so I did sit in on that one. And Shane, if you'll let me know if I'm not getting this right, but looking at those transitional zoning, it's really hard to find a place that's done it that may be one small town of like 2,000 or 3,000 people, it seemed like. But we keep, in my mind, it's like we keep going back to, it's a development, it's a developer that determines these transitional zones from whatever they're doing in their own development, and not the city saying you have to do this. So I mean, it's a great idea. I think it's a great idea. I don't know how you apply that to a city. And you know, we were even talking about, I know we've what was proposed and what's kind of brought this to the top is having a larger lot development next to a smaller lot development. And so the question was asked, hey, if the small development was there first, then you couldn't build it goes both ways. You couldn't build your big lots next to this small lot if this transitional zoning goes in both directions. And so that starts, that raises a pause. Whoa, hang on a minute. So it goes in both ways. So anyway, it's That's what I got from it, is if you're gonna have it, the developer's gonna drive it. And one of the things also that we talked about is if you did have a blanket transitional zoning for a municipality, we can, just in our lifetime in Durant, or let's say over the last 10 to 20 years, let's say last 10 years, how the residential product that seems to be in demand has changed. So just looking into the future, we set up a transitional zoning, that may work for a few years, but if the market changes of what's in demand, we don't want to end up with a big pocket somewhere of these that aren't a product that the market is in need of or wants. So anyway, just thought I'd share that.
Is there a need for the transitional zoning to go both ways? I mean, would anybody ever have an issue with larger lots?
I think it may, depending on, I guess you'd have to have a specific incident to see what would come about with it, but if you jumped from this small to a lot, well, it would make this one violate the rule. So if I have a half acre and my neighbor wants a 1 acre, then now
It's not
I'm,
necessarily violating a rule because it's already established at that point. I mean, you're talking about things moving forward, not retro.
Yeah, I think what he's trying to say is, say, next year, there's a development that goes in with a whole bunch of quarter-acre lots, R1 development, quarter-acre lots. If we had a transitional zoning method established that said the next biggest thing adjacent to that could be half-acre lots. But what if, developer Horner over here wanted to do 1 acre lots on that plot instead of half acre? Is he
And my
is he
question
not
is-
allowed to do that because even though he's going larger?
Yeah, I think I understand that. I think my question is, does the restriction need to go both directions? I mean, is there a scenario where someone would have issue with a larger lot?
That is a good question.
To me, it would only make sense coming down. I'm just thinking aloud, but
Yeah.
Well, my thought
It's a
is,
good
is
thought.
you might still have run into the same situation that's kind of spurred this a little further along, where you have 1 acre lot next to a quarter acre lot or whatever, and you're still having that.
But at that point,
Ruffle
not only the
feathers.
developer, but those people who are buying would be in the know. I mean, the smaller lot development would be there.
That's true, that's true. I don't know. I would like to say, we have a lot more questions than we do have
Sure.
answers. And it's not done in Oklahoma that we have found thus far. There's a couple overlay districts that use it as a zoning, like just the zoning, but not lot size. The lot size stuff has not been done in Oklahoma. It's been done in Texas somewhat, and I've reached out to a couple people I know down in Texas in hopes that we can get some more answers, but right now I don't have any answers at all. So that's what hopefully this committee is gonna be able to figure out and figure out the
Thanks
best
for-
way forward.
Those who are looking into it.
My pleasure.
is that it on transitional zoning? We'll go to item 4, administrative item, discussion regarding zoning code 157.031, uses permitted in districts and setback regulations.
So after our last meeting, oops, this is the wrong packet. Hang on a second. I grabbed too many at once. After our last meeting, last month, Commissioner Drew Jackson brought up an email that talked about questioning how we have the ability to have the more restrictive use going into less restrictive districts, and as well as some of these setback requirements of not having any as far as the C3 and in some of the industrial zoning. So I spent some time, after that email conversation went back and forth, spent some time looking at kind of what other cities have done and are doing. And I looked at 5 cities. I looked at Bethany, Tahlequah, Ada, McAllister, and Tecumseh. All cities are roughly about the size of us, if not a little smaller or bigger on either side, but they're relatively close to us. And some of their ordinances have been updated in the last few years, and some have still kind of older ordinances. So within, what was found within Bethany was that it doesn't list the ability to have more restrictive uses and less restrictive districts, but they did have overlay districts and mixed use ordinances that allowed for that type of scenario. And their ordinances was recently updated as of about, I believe it was about 2 years ago. And also they did have setbacks of various kinds. I did include the entire ordinance for you guys to look at, because I figured it was easier to do that than trying to summarize everything. Tahlequah did have, where you could have more restrictive uses in less restrictive districts. The only exception was as industrial. They did not allow for any residential, but they allowed for only certain types of commercial. And if memory serves, it was more like the higher, like what we'd consider like highway commercial or like have your bigger type of commercial developments. And they also had setbacks in each type of zoning category. Ada there's a little different. They had their ag districts, but they had certain allowable uses in each district. Some of them may have been overlapped, but then once you got into the residential and commercial, the residential and commercial did allow for the more restrictive use in a less restrictive district. But again, in industrial, it didn't allow for residential in the industrial, and it only listed a few of the commercial. And I think in theirs it specifically listed out what was allowed. And again, they also had setbacks in just about every some kind in every district. McAllister has zoning districts divided up. Doesn't look like, but I saw that they really allowed kind of that more restrictive use in a less restrictive district. They kind of liked it. They kind of had it where residential is in residential, commercials and commercial, industrials and industrial. So that's kind of how they had theirs. And then also they also had setbacks. Within Tecumseh had, again, they kind of divided up. But there looked like they had some where it could be kind of an overlap of use in the same district, or in different districts. And then they also had a mixed use type of district. It was a little different of how that was worded. So, that was kind of it. We wanted to bring this to you guys to kind of hold a discussion and kind of get some guidance of next steps of what you guys would like to see, and what guys would like to move forward on. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them and see what you guys think.
So since I was the one who sent the email, I'll go ahead and start us off. So I guess my concern is allowing uses that are outside of the broader classifications. For instance, I wouldn't want residential and commercial or industrial, but to keep all residential within itself. So if you want to have an R1 use and an R3 zoning, I'm okay with that, but I wouldn't want an R1 in a I1 zoning. So that was the interpretation by city attorney. So if that's our interpretation, it's just my belief we ought to change it.
And I'll make a quick comment as well. As you know, we adopted the comprehensive plan. Our next step is obviously updating the land use ordinance, the entire chapter. And the RFQ is expected to go out in the next couple weeks. And so I've kind of been gaining some ideas of what I would like to see how that might go. Now, I don't know, again, if that'll actually go the way I'm thinking. But one of the ideas I have is to keep residential and residential, commercial and commercial, industrial and industrial. And then in our mixed-use districts, that's where we allow the mix of residential and commercial, and then commercial and industrial. So that's kind of how my brain is wrapping around of where we might go. Again, that's not obviously set in stone, but that's kind of where I'm thinking of. And I've been doing some of this research. I've discovered some different zoning categories or different zoning uses that we might look into and see if they might be something that might be adaptable for here, just to kind of give us some different angles to look at things.
I think in the back and forth email, the city manager did mention that this would be something that could be considered with a major revision. I guess what I was, requesting is that even if it's a simple language change, we do that soon. I think you guys all understand that when some of this information gets out, it's not long before others take advantage of it, and to me, this could be a significant abuse. So I don't think it would take much to change the language, so you keep turning me up. I'm gonna keep pushing it away.
I agree with what you're saying, Drew. I read through this several, I mean, I read through it over and over again several times. And after hearing what we heard last week about the interpretation of that, and then in looking at these examples that Danielle gave, even from these other municipalities, I think at a minimum, we need to categorize these things, similar to what you're saying, that a less restricted or a more restricted classification could go into a less restrictive zone, but only within the category. I mean, we currently have 5 categories, you know, A, R, C, I, H. And so I think those categories within themselves, I can see this kind of rule, but outside of the categories, I think is a huge mistake. And I don't think we've been interpreting that way, at least in the couple of years that I've been on the board. And then other times when I've been standing at that podium presenting to the board at the time, I don't think we've ever interpreted it as a crossover like that between zones, although it does read that way.
Right.
So I think at a minimum, it'd be prudent to get some additional sentence into that 157.023. I thought I wrote a note too. I mean, I wrote several notes on here, but I thought I wrote, but anyway, at a minimum, I think we should set some parameters that can only happen within the category that you're applying for, or, you know, whether it's R, C, I guess A and H are one of their own, but, anyway, that's my 2 cents on it.
Any other thoughts?
Oh, I agree. I think that if it doesn't fit in the box, they can ask for rezoning or a variance. So I think that's always my interpretation as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I personally would like to see each one be their own. But, I mean, I'm assuming that's what you're saying. Like, if you're C1, it's all C1. If you're C2, it's all C2, and no permitted use from one is allowed in the other, kind of thing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
Some uses can be in several, but, that would be my personal take on it. So that, I mean, if you're moving forward with a purposeful development, so we're trying to pull Durant ordinances out of, you know, 1964. So with that purposeful development, I think we need to be purposeful in what we're establishing, so that there's not all these loopholes and crossovers, and we end up with a lot of the mess that we already have. So, understanding that there's a major overhaul of
Right.
157 coming from this RFQ that you're putting out, I think that might be the time to look at that and propose that. I think in the immediate need, me personally, I think it'd be great to come back here next month and pass an update to that ordinance that says it's restricted to the category. Because I think that's a quick, easy add, like Drew was saying.
I can certainly work on that and bring it to y'all next month. Thank you.
Sounds good, thank you.
Thank you.
Anything on setbacks? Do we want to talk about that while we're on this subject?
Yes. You want me to start?
Go ahead.
So I think, and even in looking at some of these other municipalities from the 5 or so that you sent to us, having a setback to some degree in every zoning category is a must. I think, I mean, there's several life safety of people in general is one. I mean, there's no reason that someone should be building on their property line. Just, obviously, these are my opinions. So I think we're creating detriment to adjacent landowners. I think we're at a disservice to our citizens by allowing these zero setback builds or developments. And there is a minimum that we have established in terms of a front yard setback that applies to every district already, outside of the CBD. CBD, it doesn't apply, but we do have one that talks about front yard setback minimums across any district, or am I saying that right? District, zoning district, classification, sorry. But we don't have anything that addresses a minimum setback on side and rear. So I think, I mean, if we're not gonna go through in this ordinance and update what these setbacks might be in terms of 5 feet, 10 feet, 20 feet, whatever they might be, I think there should be a blanket statement in there that no matter the zoning category, district, it's a minimum of at least this. And like I said, we established that in, I didn't write it down, but I think it was in 1990 that was updated. So it's right underneath the R classifications and descriptions, which was from like 1980, and then like in 1990, we updated with a minimum for front setbacks, but we didn't update any sort of minimum for any of the other sides, rears, that sort of thing. Yeah, 157.023-B. Actually, that was updated in 03, not 1990. Hey, what do you know?
Wow.
So, but even something simple like that establishes a minimum, no matter what district you're in, I think we need to be doing that at a minimum for all property lines.
I think if you don't do something like this, eventually you're gonna have something come in that's going to back up to a major intersection in town and, with no lot lines there.
Eventually.
That goes back to the, life safety and even traffic concerns. I mean, if you got an ambulance that's coming this direction, trying to make a turn, whatever, they can't, I mean, you're not seeing, it's not good.
Yeah, I think, using your hypothetical situation here, Clint, even if it weren't on a major intersection, the ability for someone to butt their building up next to the property line, and then say the, industry B comes in on the adjacent property, and they're only required to be back, actually, they're not required to be back any, but building code wise would require them to be set back a certain amount from an adjacent building. So it's just a life safety hazard in general. Even if it's only a 5-foot setback according to the IBC, you've got a 5-foot wide by 150-foot long corridor that, I mean, it just creates life safety issues outside of traffic, pedestrian. Yes.
Is there any thoughts as far as what that number might be, or any other thoughts about setbacks in general?
Mr. Dean made a point that I think plays a role in that question. You know, he pointed out that C3 and the CBD currently align. So obviously, when we're thinking about setbacks, you know, being a minimum, you know, across all, what was the word, classifications, is that what we decided? Districts? You know, I think it's important to keep CBD in mind. You know, I think I might be a bigger proponent of, you know, go ahead and labeling for each.
I agree that each should have their own minimum.
I don't know what the, even if you went with the minimum standard, I think for combustible, you know, being separated, be 5 feet on, you know, each side of that property line, so even at an absolute, I don't know what the correct answer should be, but I do believe to even meet that fire code, you've got to have 5 foot on a side setback minimum. And I do agree with a minimum of that 15-foot setback if you're on an exterior corner, or if you're on, you know, like, just as a minimum. So that, I mean, that would be for a side setback. Just going off of what our other side setbacks are. And that is for, those setbacks I gave you are for residential, that minimum of 5 and a 5 and 15.
We actually, sorry, meant to clear my throat before I turned my microphone on. We, I mean, we actually have 10-foot minimums on our setbacks for most of them, with the exception of highway commercial, which is a 1-to-1 with your building height. And the CBD and C3, you're right, they are aligned. But, and I can understand that in CBD. I mean, that's the first, 4 blocks of town here from First Street West.
But also remember, within the CBD, it's designated on the future land use map to expand that. So just something to think about, that's what's currently there, because it's
Yeah.
obviously the older part of town, and that's the way it is.
Sure.
But if that does get expanded, now obviously that's gotta be a rezoning that's done at a later time, or however that works. Then, if that is done, then what that's gonna do is, it's obviously gonna have to meet those setbacks.
Sure.
So just.
You know, and just as an example of this hypothetical that we're talking about, you know, it would have, our current setbacks would have worked, or would work if that building was abutted to a non-resident or adjacent non-residential district. So it was adjacent, let's say, to a non-residential district, so there was none required. If it was adjacent to a residential district, it would have been 1 foot for 1 foot of height setback. So just, we may have to tweak that. I guess if we have a minimum, it's not gonna, it'll cover all that, but I guess. Did any and all of that make good, clear sense?
Clear as mud. So as far as the CBD, since we've talked about that, what are your thoughts on, do we want to leave that for the time being the way it is? Or do we want to think about having a minimum for the CBD as well?
My opinion is we should have a minimum for all. You know, I don't think we're ever gonna regret pushing them back a bit, especially if this is a growing community.
How does that work if you have does our other ordinance that, let's say 3 buildings in this, on Main burned down and want to rebuild those back,
They'd have to meet current standards.
it wouldn't fall under the, if you had something there and it fell down or burnt down, you couldn't rebuild it?
There'd be the non-conforming piece would come into that, but if I remember right, within that non-conforming, if it's damaged more than 50%, it has to meet the current code. So whatever that is.
Could there be a variance approved for that? And that way there's some accountability moving forward?
Potentially. I will say we've just recently had a Board of Adjustment meeting, and the tide has changed as far as getting a variance. It appears anyways. So I don't know, it might be a little tough to get a variance, but it's possible.
If this is going to be part of the total rewrite, I would think that that issue could be addressed as well. So, you know, if it was a part of the older district,
Right.
for whatever reason has to be tore down, rebuilt,
Right.
you may be allowed to
Yes,
rebuild at the
you're
current
exactly right.
line.
Yep.
You know, with a larger bit of language.
Oh, yeah, there's a way that,
I'm more thinking ahead of those
of the new, yeah.
vacant hypotheticals.
Yeah, I actually, I wonder if you wouldn't handle that with I don't think we should count on common sense. But I do think that, I mean, we already have established the CBD district.
Right.
So if that were to be expanded at some point in the future with the future land use map, it may be that it becomes a whole nother zoning district. Like it may be
Could.
CBD two.
Right.
Or,
it
you know,
could be-
whatever that may be, so that if something did happen with this, within this original kind of historic 4 blocks here, that could be built back in accordance with CBD. But if that expands in the future, then maybe we do have some of those setbacks, and that's called CBD 2, or, I mean, you know.
And, yeah, there is a ways around it. I just wanted to make
Yeah,
sure everybody,
yeah.
we thought about it before we just, you
Yeah.
know, did a blanket thing and then find out it didn't work.
Yeah.
So,
I don't think you want to ruin the fabric of your downtown,
no, not at all.
and then it turns into Nowhere USA because you had these silly rules in place that wouldn't allow you to build it back.
Exactly, yeah. Yep, I agree.
You could have more parking, that's true.
I'll work on some of that
Okay.
and bring you back some ideas and see where it goes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll go to item number 5, our public hearings portion. 5A, discussion, consideration, and possible action on PC 2021-28, a rezoning request from A1 General Agriculture to R3 General Residential for property located near Linden Woods Drive and Thomas Circle.
So this is obviously the property that's kind of north and east of the current Linden Woods development. It's the same people that own it. They are wanting the rezoning, since it's zoned as ag, to match the R3 residential that's currently Linden Woods. And their hopes is to have an expanding new housing development that'll match the current Linden Woods, which is single-family duplex and multifamily housing. We have not received any comments or questions or oppositions since the notifications have gone out. The property is about 37 acres in total. There's obviously currently a vacant piece of property. The area is mostly a residential and commercial, and there's a few industrial areas in that particular area. The future land use map at the time of the application did have it as the area as medium density residential. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And the applicant's also here if you have any questions for him.
You've probably come a long ways, so we'll let you, if you want to speak, we'll let you say something. If you would, give us your name, please.
You bet. Ryan Hackett. I'm out of Salt Lake, but been developing here in Oklahoma for quite some time. We have developments in Holdenville and McAllister and Ardmore, Guthrie, and here. We're excited about the Linden Woods developments. We've kind of progressed with single family and duplexes, and now just currently built some townhouses out there. With costs increasing, we've found the need and desire of many of the tenants to kind of consolidate and do some townhouses. This is just kind of the next segment that we'd like to continue to pursue. We haven't master planned it yet. We have some ideas in place, but the R3 would give us the flexibility to incorporate some of the same practices that we've been doing in the others. The current financing on the ones that are there doesn't allow like full-time students to be qualified. So we've also kind of looked at some, some pieces, maybe doing a little bit of that, doing a little bit of this with some more townhomes, maybe doing a for sale component of some single family. It's 37 acres is quite a big piece and would have many uses to be able to. But that R3 would give us some flexibility and allow us to kind of take some chunks here and there and get that done.
How much land do you have developed there now that you guys already have? Do you remember how much acreage that
I
is?
don't know exactly. I want to say it's about 15 to 20 acres probably.
Okay, so it's gonna be about twice the size, close to twice the size of what you have now as
Yeah,
far
I
as the
think
land
so.
mass.
And I've been sitting here listening to some of the setbacks and those ordinances and things, and thinking about how we can make sure we're incorporating those. Thinking about how California has 0 lot lines. Luckily, we're not in that stage here. But as I drove around there today, thinking, wow, there's a lot of grass here, and a lot of the tenants either struggle to maintain some of their yards, or so maybe thinking about how to consolidate some of those, or making sure that the use is correct. If it is a for sale, to leave it a little bit bigger for people to have extra little space and maintain their own lots. But in multifamily, to be able to just have some great common area where they can gather, but also because they're in townhomes or other multifamily kind of development opportunities, and they don't want to do any of the yard keep and things like that. So giving a mix of opportunities for everybody.
Yeah. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any discussion? Do I
I'll
have-
move to approve.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Call for a vote, please. Motion carries. Thank you. I'm sure you're familiar with the process. It goes before council next Tuesday for approval. So just reminding you of that. Item 5B, I believe, was pulled from our agenda.
Correct. The applicant withdrew the application before the packets were, or after the packets were put together, and he will come back later at a later time with potentially, but at this point, he withdrew the application.
Any new business? Any discussion? Motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
Call for the vote, please. Meeting adjourned.